What a nice group. I can't tell you, this is our third show. Every audience has been terrific. Enjoy myself. I take this out to see what time it is, so I know how long I've been on stage, so I know when to get off. Here's the problem. If you don't look at the fucking thing before you come on stage, then 7:02 doesn't mean jack shit, quite frankly. I love my iPhone. It can get frustrating. The other day I got so angry at it, almost threw it against the back wall. And here's how crazy angry I was. I asked Siri if she had any last words. She did. She said I didn't have the balls. I didn't. Once I spent 3 minutes looking for that while I was talking on it. And the idiot I was talking to was no help. He said, "Do you want me to give you a call?" I have become clumsy in my old age. Anybody ever drop their phone in the toilet? Yeah, I did. And after I did, I put my phone in a bag of rice. Anybody ever drop a bag of rice in the toilet?
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, January the 17th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, motivation, meditation, and the Cold War. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
If you know the position a person takes on taxes, you can tell their whole philosophy. The tax code, once you get to know it, embodies all the essence of life: greed, politics, power, goodness, charity. Sheldon S. Cohen. It is sad but true. Does one see coercion as a means of effecting charity? You will see it in their view of taxes. Does one hold to a high view of self-government or a low view that requires an ever-growing state to assume those duties? You will see it in their view of taxes.
And that was There's No Free Lunch. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is a clip of a guy expressing very well the conflict, the at the ground level conflict between conservatism and liberalism.
Walk into my dorm room and I see my roommate is drinking underage in the dorm room at the prep school on a military base. What do you think is the military school's policy on underage drinking in the dorm room?
I'm going to say you're not allowed to do that.
Zero tolerance.
Did you narc on him?
That's exactly what I did. It was the right thing that got me in all kinds of trouble. They are making a bad decision, but my moral obligation here is to turn them in. I pulled my roommate out first. Hey, you're breaking the rules. I don't really want to have to turn you in. What I would much prefer is if you close this party down and then go tell officer in command, and nobody else in the room gets in trouble because you self-reported. You know what my roommate said to that? You gonna narc on us? I was like, dude, I don't want to, but this is what I have to do. Then I go talk to the officer in charge. That dude looks at me and he's like, you're turning in your roommate? What do you mean? This is what I'm supposed to do. He's like, dude, haven't you ever heard of loyalty and cooperate to graduate? This is what you guys told us to do. And he's like, well, now that you've reported it to me, I have to do something with it. So the way that ended, he got kicked out of the Air Force Academy prep school.
So there you go. And this is the classic liberal versus conservative issue. The liberals' motto is be cool. Be cool. And I grew up with that. And I was told literally by people, by liberals, be cool, be cool. And these are the people that wanted to break the rules all the time. They expected you, if you weren't going to go along with it and join them in breaking the rules, then they expected you to keep your mouth shut. No. As a conservative, no, I can't do that. This guy did the right thing as a conservative in reporting him. Now, the reason that he got so-called in trouble was because his roommate assumed that he was a liberal. That's what the liberals have a tendency to do. They assume everyone's a liberal. So when you go into a dormitory, let's say you're going to college, you go into a dormitory and you meet your roommate, you need to sit down for a second or just tell him right off. As soon as you meet him, shake his hand, I'm Bill. Hey, Bill, guess what? I'm a conservative. Now, what that means is that I don't put up with any bullshit. You're not going to be violating the rules and expecting me to go along with it. So you want to break the rules, you go somewhere else and do it. Because if I catch you doing it, I'm going to report you so fucking fast, it'll make your fucking head spin. Okay, now he knows. You have set him straight, so to speak. He now knows what the deal is. You're a conservative, and he can, if he doesn't like it, he can go to whoever it is that's running the dormitory and get himself a new roommate. Either have you move out or he moves out. But that way, you're not going to have the problem that this guy suffered. Because this guy was suffering simply, are you going to narc on us? He assumed that this guy was a liberal. He assumes everybody's a liberal. Hey, welcome in. Welcome to the military prep academy, and be cool. And maybe this guy was talking as though he was a liberal, right? Because the go along to get along mentality. And as a conservative, you got to put your foot down. You got to let people know I'm a conservative at some point. There is times when, yes, putting a kick me sign on your back is stupid and bad and a wrong thing to do. But there are other times when you have to make it clear. And when you're in a personal situation, you got a roommate, You need to let them know, I'm conservative, and this is what that means. And this way, he's on notice. If he doesn't like it, right? Because the people that get mad are the ones that think that you're cool, that you're going to go along with the program, and then all of a sudden you're running to the commander or to the authority figure and reporting them. And they feel like they have been lied to. So if you go in and let people know up front that you're conservative, you're more likely to do much, much better than if you don't. A little bit further on this, when I was in high school, everybody in high school was, wearing, was hippie-esque. This was the hippie phase had kind of gone, but there was remnants of it. The way they dressed, the way we acted, the way we talked, and all that we're liberal, basically. We had two guys in high school, they were brothers, that were as conservative as you're going to get. They wore very short, military short haircuts. It just wasn't done. I mean, teenagers in those days just didn't do that. Okay, so the military short haircuts, they wore slacks and dress shirts, may have even worn ties. I don't remember. One of them, the older brother, ended up going to West Point, getting a nomination to West Point. And his younger brother wanted to follow him into West Point. But anyways, they were really conservative, button-down guys. But everybody knew it. They got no guff or crap from anybody because everybody knew who they were. They weren't running around pretending to be cool and then reporting their friends for smoking dope or whatever they're doing. You knew if you're going to break the rules, you don't do it around those two guys because you know those two guys are going to report you. So, back in a minute. Thank you. Now from an Instagram account called the Damiani Felder.
You know why you're not seeing a lot of black people out there protesting against ICE? You know why you're seeing predominantly white people only at these events? It's because back in 2020, the Democrats utilized the black demographic to go out and riot and act a fool. And they said, oh, if you just elect us, we'll give you reparations and we'll force the police to wear body cameras and all these wonderful, amazing things, right? So black people showed up like we are known to do, and we voted up and down for one side of the aisle. And what did we get for it? Nothing as usual, because many of us never learn. But now, here in 2026, we're seeing individuals who were slavishly devoted to the Democrat Party. Now they're seeing the Democrats over their entire 4 years in office under Joe Biden. They went out of their way to ingratiate themselves to illegal immigrants. And they sometimes prioritized illegal immigrants, even in black communities, ahead of black American citizens. And black people are sitting there saying, wait, you said you were going to give us reparations, you're going to give us X, Y, and Z. And we got nothing for it. So the silver lining is a lot of people are waking up and realizing the Democrats are only courting their next prospective voting bloc. They want to exploit illegal immigrants for an entire generation, much like they've exploited the black community for the previous several generations. And they're daring you to call them out on that and see it for what it is. So if you're wondering why you only see predominantly white liberals out here acting a fool, rioting and protesting against ICE, it's because ICE is threatening their ability to cater to that next demographic that they desperately want to lock in for an entire generation. And that's just the God's honest truth. Those are my thoughts. Hopefully you agree. And if you do, let me know in the comment section down below.
And that was, again, an Instagram account called the Damiani Felder. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of motivation.
Feed you. When nobody knows what you're doing, when you studying without coach, when you putting in those extra reps, when you watching those videos and you getting inspired, when you change your music, it's the process that makes you sweet.
No matter how good you are, no matter how fast you are, no matter how smart you are, no matter how strong you are, there is always someone out there who will be bigger, faster, smarter, or stronger.
So what do? You can't always control who or what you're up against, but you can always control your effort. you must outwork every single one of those people you're competing with. When you find yourself up against other people and see yourself falling behind, are you the person who gives up and gives in? Are you the person who starts making excuses for why you're not doing as much as you could? Are you the person who finds it a reason to start doing things you're not supposed to, taking breaks, slacking off, sleeping in, eating like crap? Or are you the one who sees opportunity? The opportunity to get ahead of everyone else. The opportunity to work harder and perform better when it's game time. The opportunity to improve yourself and hold yourself accountable to what you know you can achieve if you really tried your hardest. In the shadows and darkness, when most people are still in bed or have gone home already, where you fight to become the best version of yourself every damn day.
It's that process of pushing yourself to perform better. That's what stretches you to reach higher and higher levels. You don't become number one by taking it easy. You become number one by pushing yourself to the outer limits of your capabilities.
It's these quiet, unseen moments that legends are made. You're not there to participate. You're there to fucking dominate.
You gotta refuse to accept that you are what you are, and that what your life is like now is what you're doomed to be forever. No, you fight. You scratch and claw every day to improve. Just a little bit. Weeding out all those weaknesses you have sneaking around in your brain. You weed those out with discipline, forcing yourself to execute on your mission for the day.
Doing those hard things you have resistance from doing. And as you shut down those weaknesses, as you continue to prune out all the fickle feelings of laziness, you are literally building mental strength. You become tougher through completion. When you get hard stuff done, it builds your belief in your vision. It builds belief in your company. It builds belief in your ideas. It builds belief in yourself.
So while most people are sitting around waiting for change, making all these amazing plans for how to revolutionize their lives and become better, you get your ass up and get to fucking work. Plans don't change people. Action changes people. So make movement. Move forward every day of your life.
If they make 10 sales, you make 20. If they work 8 hours, you work 10. Whatever they do, I need you to do just a little more, because when you add up all those extra bits of effort, day after day after day, that's going to make the difference between winning and losing.
When others start slacking off, making excuses, you see a golden opportunity. It's your chance to double down, to push harder when everyone else is easing up. Every setback, every obstacle is a chance to show what you're made of. It's a chance to toughen up, to hone your skills, to rise above the bullshit.
You might not control the raw talent, but you sure as hell control the effort. It's about grinding harder, pushing further, sweating more. It's about turning every damn ounce of your being into a relentless pursuit of excellence. You become the fucking nightmare of everyone in your field, because while they're resting on their laurels, you're out there, grinding, improving, outworking every single one of them.
You don't just aim to keep up. You aim to leave them all in your fucking dust.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little meditation. That was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 22. Do not ingest the poison pill of conventional wisdom. General Patton once observed, "If everybody is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking." What has come to be viewed as safe and irrefutable wisdom, namely that cache of platitudes uncritically imbibed by the baby boomer generation in their own time and then mechanically regurgitated by them as sacred truth, a one-size-fits-all miracle balm for all situations, is really a roadmap for how to be outfoxed by radicals and lose the culture in just a few short years. As sanctimonious as the boomers have been in doling out their empty bromides, the critically thinking retrograde must be equally diligent in rejecting them. Why the boomers are comfortable scolding retrogrades for not closely adhering to their losing set of rules of engagement is anyone's guess. Consider this. In just a couple of decades, from the 1960s to the 1970s, America's culture was successfully co-opted and transformed by a loud minority of strung-out radicals, while conservative boomers, hamstrung by their ill-conceived sensibilities, offered mere token resistance, giving way at every turn. 20 years' time gave us no-fault divorce, abortion on demand, ubiquitous contraception, mainstream feminism, the working mother, religious indifferentism, the welfare state in the form of the Great Society, draconian environmentalism, destigmatized drug use and fornication, and a watershed federal piece of gun control legislation, the Gun Control Act of 1968. Yet, conservative boomers feign indignance when younger generations refuse to march in lockstep with their feckless advice. It's like the Cleveland Browns demanding, with straight faces, that the rest of the NFL's teams should make use of their playbook. No thanks. We'll look elsewhere, anywhere else. Boomers, you failed us. Your time is up. Kindly retire to the ignominy of the shadows and rid us of your bad ideas once and for all. So what are examples of the sorts of boomerisms that are to be spurned with extreme prejudice? The list is long, but it's worth producing some notable examples for posterity. Boomers are obsessed with cosmetics over substance. They insist on scolding retrogrades for the tone that we use when doing ideological battle against radicals. They have made "thou shalt be nice" into the 11th commandment. They are constantly finger-wagging at zealous young retrogrades who proclaim truth with fiery speech. They insist that retrogrades must use a sanitized speaking style, devoid of passion, devoid of flair, devoid of any hint of righteous anger about the iniquity of the left. They believe that it's inherently sinful to use speech with teeth, to show ire, to meet evil ideas with harsh rebuke, when in fact, Thomas Aquinas teaches just the opposite. It's disordered to not act on righteous anger, to let evil go undenounced, according to the angelic doctor. Bold, clear, and sometimes angry speech is the only kind of speech that is effective in calling the hoi polloi out of the stupor into which they've been placed by the constant deluge of radical propaganda. If Trump's 2016 presidential campaign shows us anything, it shows just how foolish the mindless boomer attachment to anodyne speech really is. We were breathlessly told by conventional pundits during the course of the election that Trump would have to soften his tone to win the general election because suburban women don't like negativity. In the wake of Trump's resounding victory, have the talking heads recanted their flawed advice? Have they reconsidered their attachment to insipid, idle affirmation? Of course not. Nevertheless, what matters is what you say, not how you say it. Don't let anyone tell you differently. The biblical prophets and the apostles were caustic at times in delivering the good news when the occasion called for it, when the actions of their flocks occasioned stern rebuke. Don't let pusillanimous boomers convince you that there is an inherently sinful tone. There isn't. What matters is substance. Style is prudential and individual. The mystical body of Christ has many parts. Some of us are called to be the killer T cells. Perhaps had the boomers delivered more Jeremiads in their own time, we would have been spared rampant societal cancers like abortion, feminism, and divorce. Another self-evidently flawed boomerism is that peaceability is inherently virtuous, that peace is an end in and of itself. Cowards never admit their cowardice. They always cloak it in the extravagant garb of magnanimity. When boomers have sounded the call for retreat on a whole slew of pressing cultural and political ideas, they have always couched their decision to stop fighting settled cultural battles in a slavish commitment to national unity and peace. But as Christ himself tells us, peace isn't to be embraced at the expense of justice. It is for this reason that he announced that he came to bring not peace, but a sword. Not only is it not virtuous to roll over and accept radical victories in regard to fundamental cultural questions, such as the protection of life, the preservation of marriage, and the unchecked expansion of a runaway federal government, it's actually sinful. But boomers have declared that their lack of fight on bellwether issues is actually noble. Don't be deceived. Fighting isn't inherently sinful. Sometimes it's sinful not to fight. Perhaps the most noxious boomerism, the one most stridently and priggishly espoused, is that it's inherently wrong to pronounce moral judgment on others. It has been said that an insufficient amount of Christianity is more dangerous than no Christianity at all. The campaign against judging others is proof of this. Sitting on their high horses, boomers have ripped out of context and weaponized one of the few Bible verses that the lukewarm actually know, to the detriment of Christ and his church, truth, and Western culture. Where Christ exhorts, "Judge not that you be not judged," he's certainly not telling us to refrain from labeling certain agents and actions as good and others as evil. If he were, then he couldn't, without contradicting himself, instruct us elsewhere to judge with right judgment. And if your brother sins against you, rebuke him. What Christ is telling us is to not presume to condemn others, pronouncing definitive judgment on the eternal destination of their souls, since this is God's prerogative. He's also telling us not to harp on the relatively small flaws of others to the neglect of our own larger flaws. However, the righteous man, whose flaws are relatively benign compared with the vices of baser men, actually has a duty to correct others. This is why the church has long recognized that admonishing the sinner is one of the spiritual works of mercy. Not only should we not refrain from making moral judgments about others, we are actually bound in our consciences to make such judgments in order to guide the culture in a just direction and to care for the souls of our fellow men. One must affirmatively distinguish what is good from what is evil in order to know what to do and what not to do, to know what to vote for and what not to vote for, to know when to celebrate and when to fight, and to know who is good and who is bad. To deliberately abstain from making moral judgments about agents and actions is to embrace moral relativism, the arch-heresy of heresies, the denial of objective truth itself. While it is impossible to, here, compile a plenary list of the various and sundry false platitudes that together constitute the platform of conventional wisdom, one should be guided by the rule, common sense is not so common. Whatever advice is rendered to the retrograde, he must take pains to examine it carefully before heeding it. No rule is to be considered beyond reproach, save those reflecting the eternal moral law. We must therefore be inquisitive of the track record of every dispensary of advice. If he is reciting the playbook of an unsuccessful era, we must be firm and loud in our rejection of his ideas. To draw from an axiom that is based on truth, it is insanity to do the same thing over and over again while expecting a different result. If we do not allow ourselves to be quagmired by sacrosanct tropes from the past, we have a better chance of winning back the culture of the future. Think critically and stay sharp. Never be content to be part of the herd.
And that was Rule 22 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you now, Alice Weidel.
Wir werden Fremde im eigenen Land. Wir werden drangsaliert durch Ausländer aus Ländern mit einer sehr hohen Kriminalitätsbelastung. Afghanistan, Syrien, Irak. Deutsche Kinder sind an den Schulen größtenteils in der Minderzahl, werden auch drangsaliert durch sogenannte Jugendgruppen. Unsere Kinder lernen zu wenig an den Schulen, weil unsere Lehrer teilweise, wenn sie nicht auch gerade drangsaliert werden, damit beschäftigt sind, die ganzen Sachen ins Deutsche mit zu übersetzen oder umgekehrt. Das wird ja allmählich zum Fremdsprachenunterricht hier.
And that was Alice Weidel. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Cold War.
February 26, 1991. The time is 4 p.m. The location is a stretch of featureless, wind-scoured desert in southern Iraq, known on military maps simply as 73 Easting. A relentless Shamal wind is howling, whipping up a wall of sand and rain that reduces visibility to less than 1,000 meters. Inside the turret of a T-72 main battle tank, an Iraqi commander of the elite Tawakalna division peers through his optical sights. He sees nothing but a brown, swirling void. He is not worried. In fact, he is confident. He is sitting inside the pinnacle of Soviet export armor. His unit is dug in, positioned in a perfect defensive hull-down posture, waiting to ambush the approaching coalition forces. According to the Soviet military advisors who had trained his officers for years, the Americans were terrified of casualties. The advisors had assured Baghdad that the American ground forces would rely on their heavy M1 Abrams tanks to lead the charge. And while the Abrams was formidable, the Soviets insisted it was heavy, thirsty, and prone to getting bogged down. But the vehicle the Iraqi commanders were least concerned about was the American infantry carrier, the M2 Bradley. To the Soviet strategic mind, the Bradley was a joke. It was a contradiction in steel. It was too tall, standing almost 10 feet high, a towering silhouette compared to the low-profile Soviet BMP vehicles. It was clad in aluminum, a metal the Soviets mocked as flammable. It was an infantry carrier that tried to play at being a tank, a bloated project that had spent the 1980s being ridiculed by the American press and Soviet intelligence alike. The Russians called it a bus, a target, a coffin for 7 soldiers. The Iraqi commander checks his radio. Silence. The sandstorm provides perfect cover. If the Americans advance, they will have to close to within visual range, point-blank range, where the T-72 tank's 125mm gun can shatter them. Then, the impossible happens. There is no sound of approaching turbine engines. There is no trembling of the earth that signals a heavy tank battalion. Just a sudden, violent streak of light cutting through the sandstorm. 1,000 meters to the commander's left, a T-72 tank explodes. The turret, weighing 12 tons, is ripped from the hull and tossed into the air like a toy. The commander screams for his gunner to scan for targets. Where did the shot come from? Was it an airstrike? Impossible in this weather. Was it a mine? Another streak. Another explosion. This time, a BMP vehicle 200 meters to his right erupts in a fireball. The radio comes alive, but it is just a cacophony of panic. "We cannot see them," a voice screams. "They are ghosts." The Iraqi gunner frantically cranks the turret traverses. He looks for the muzzle flash of an Abrams tank. He looks for the low silhouette of an attacker. He sees nothing. The enemy is firing from beyond the veil of the storm, hitting moving targets with mathematical precision. Then, a rhythmic thumping sound begins. It sounds like a jackhammer tearing through sheet metal. Thump, 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 thump. The commander looks through his periscope and sees tracers, hundreds of them, pouring out of the grey mist. They are not tank shells. They are 25mm rounds, smaller than a man's hand. But they are arriving with such ferocity and accuracy that they are stripping the optics off his tanks, shredding the external fuel drums, and punching through the thinner side armor of the Soviet-built machines. It is a slaughter. The invincible Republican Guard, the 4th largest army in the world, is being dismantled by an enemy they cannot see, using a weapon they do not understand. If you want to uncover the truth behind the Cold War's biggest tech surprises and the mysteries that defined an era, verify your subscription to Cold War Impact right now. The panic inside the Iraqi lines turns to total collapse. Within minutes, dozens of Soviet-made armored vehicles are burning. The few Iraqi crews who manage to return fire are shooting wildly into the sand, their shells disappearing into the gloom. They are fighting blind. But the true horror, the detail that would eventually make its way back to intelligence officers in Moscow and cause blood to run cold in the Kremlin, was not just the defeat, it was the nature of the killer. As the Iraqi commander bails out of his burning tank, choking on black smoke, he finally sees the shape emerging from the dust. It is not the terrifying M1 Abrams main battle tank. Rolling past the burning wreckage of his T-72 tank is the bus. The tall, boxy, aluminum M2 Bradley, the vehicle the Soviets had laughed at, the vehicle that was supposed to be a clumsy troop transport. It is rolling right through the defensive line, its turret spinning, engaging 2, 3, 4 targets at once. How? How could a lightly armored personnel carrier destroy a heavy tank from 3 kilometers away in zero visibility? How could a vehicle ridiculed for 10 years suddenly become the deadliest hunter on the battlefield? To the watching world, it looked like a miraculous victory, but to the Soviet generals watching from afar, it was something much worse. It was an anomaly, a glitch in reality. Physics said the T-72 tank should win this fight. Doctrine said the heavy armor should crush the aluminum box. The footage and after-action reports that would soon flood into Moscow would trigger a quiet, desperate crisis. This wasn't just a lost battle. It was a signal that their entire understanding of armored warfare, carefully built since the 1940s, was based on a fatal miscalculation. The bus was not a joke. It was a predator, and they had no idea how it worked. The initial reports that reached the GRU headquarters in Moscow were not treated as intelligence, they were treated as hysteria. It was March 1991. The ground war in the Persian Gulf had lasted exactly 100 hours. In that blink of an eye, the Iraqi army, a force equipped, trained, and modeled after the Soviet Red Army, had ceased to exist as a cohesive fighting force. For the Soviet generals sitting in the Ministry of Defense, the sheer speed of the collapse was physically nauseating. They were not just losing an ally, They were watching a live-fire dress rehearsal of World War III, and the results suggested that if the Red Army ever crossed into West Germany, they would be vaporized in days. The scramble for answers began immediately. Soviet technical attachés, officially observers but essentially spies, began the grim work of piecing together what happened in the desert. They needed to know why the T-72 tanks, the pride of the Uralvagonzavod factory, had failed. But as the interviews with captured Iraqi officers and the analysis of the battlefield debris began to trickle in, a disturbing narrative emerged. The Iraqis were not talking about the M1 Abrams tank. They were obsessed with the Ghost. One interrogation report detailed a chaotic engagement near the Medina Ridge. An Iraqi battalion commander described seeing his BMP vehicles ripped apart before he even knew the enemy was there. When the GRU officers pressed him on the attacker, he described a tall, boxy silhouette. "It looked like a moving building," he said. "We laughed at it. We thought it was a supply truck." The Soviet analysts pulled the files. The description matched only one vehicle, the M2 Bradley. This made no sense. The KGB dossier on the Bradley was thick, and it was filled with American failures. The Soviets knew about the scandals. They knew about the congressional hearings in Washington, where the Bradley was accused of being a death trap. They knew the aluminum armor vaporized when hit by a shaped charge. They knew it was so tall it couldn't hide behind a ridgeline. To the strict materialist minds of the Soviet military, warfare was a calculation of mass and caliber. A tank weighed 40 tons and had a 125mm gun. The Bradley weighed 25 tons and had a tiny 25mm autocannon. In a head-to-head fight, the laws of physics dictated that the Bradley should be scrap metal. So, the investigation turned inward. The generals convinced themselves that the Iraqis were lying to cover up their own incompetence. They theorized that the Iraqis had abandoned their vehicles or failed to maintain their sights. But then, the photographs arrived. They were grainy, taken by retreating forces or gathered from international newsreels. They showed T-72 tanks with clean, catastrophic punctures in their turrets. These weren't the massive, jagged holes caused by the 120mm sabot rounds of an Abrams tank. These were small, precise entry wounds that had caused the ammunition inside the carousel to detonate, blowing the turrets clean off. The analysts were baffled. What weapon made that hole? They looked at the scarred armor of the survivors. Some T-72 tanks looked like they had been attacked by a swarm of metallic locusts. Their optics were smashed, their radio antennas severed, their external fuel tanks turned into sieves. This was the signature of the M242 Bushmaster chain gun. The Soviets began to run the numbers. They realized with horror that the tiny gun on the Bradley was firing depleted uranium rounds. But even then, the math didn't add up. How did the Bradleys get close enough to use them? The T-72 tank had an effective range of over 2,000 meters. The Bradley should have been dead long before it could fire a shot. The investigation spiraled into paranoia. A faction within the Soviet design bureaus suggested that the Americans must have developed a new, secret armor for the Bradley, something invisible that repelled shells. Others argued that the Americans were using some form of electronic jamming that blinded the Iraqi gunners. They were grasping at straws, looking for a super weapon explanation. They were looking for a new metal, a new explosive, or a new engine. They completely missed the truth, because it wasn't something you could weld or weigh. The Soviet military doctrine relied on the legend. This was the belief that Soviet equipment was rugged, simple, and could be produced in such massive numbers that quality became irrelevant. They believed that a tank was defined by how thick its steel was. They could not conceive that the decisive factor in 1991 wasn't the steel, it was what was happening inside the steel. The reports from the field kept mentioning the weather. The sandstorms, the rain, the oil smoke. The Iraqi gunners, using Soviet optical sights, were blind. They couldn't see 500 meters. Yet the Bradleys were killing them from 2,000 meters away. The Soviet investigators dismissed this as impossible. No optical system worked in a sandstorm. They assumed the Americans had simply gotten lucky, or that they had advanced radar support from aircraft. They concluded that the defeat was a fluke, a result of Arab incompetence and American air superiority. They wrote reports assuring the Kremlin that the T-72 tank was still superior, that the Bradley was still a flammable bus, and that the outcome would be different if Soviet crews were manning the guns. It was a fatal arrogance. While the Soviets were measuring armor thickness with calipers, they failed to realize that the Americans had fundamentally changed the nature of vision itself. The mystery wasn't a bigger gun. The mystery was that the Americans had turned the lights on in a dark room, while the Soviets were still fumbling for a match. While the GRU analysts in Moscow were chasing shadows and formulating conspiracy theories about ghost signals, the answer to the mystery was sitting in plain sight. It had been developed years earlier, not in a bunker, but in the laboratories of Texas Instruments and Hughes Aircraft. The Soviets were right about one thing. The M2 Bradley was a troubled child. During its development in the 1980s, it had been a political disaster. It was over budget, over schedule, and the subject of relentless mockery. Critics called it a rolling death trap because its aluminum armor could barely stop a heavy machine gun. But while the politicians argued about the armor thickness, a different group of American engineers was quietly revolutionizing the way war was fought. They weren't focusing on how to survive a hit. They were focusing on how to ensure the enemy never got the chance to shoot. The secret weapon inside the Bradley wasn't a gun. It was a glass eye. It was called the Integrated Sight Unit, or ISU. Inside this unassuming box on the turret was a piece of technology that the Soviet Union simply could not replicate at scale. The AN divided by VS2 thermal imager. To understand why this was the impossible variable, you have to understand how the Soviets saw the world. In 1991, Soviet night vision technology was still largely based on image intensification, taking the faint light from the stars and moon and amplifying it. If it was pitch black, or if there was a sandstorm blocking the light, the Soviet sights were useless. They also used active infrared, which required the tank to shine an infrared spotlight, essentially a giant flashlight invisible to the naked eye, but visible to other scopes. Turning it on was suicide. It announced your position to everyone. The American thermal sights were different. They were passive. They didn't need light. They detected the heat radiation emitted by objects. The physics of this were a nightmare for the Soviets. A T-72 tank is a massive engine wrapped in steel. It radiates heat like a furnace. Even if the tank is turned off, the steel retains the heat of the desert sun differently than the surrounding sand. To the gunner inside an M2 Bradley, looking through that thermal sight, the darkness didn't exist. The blinding sandstorm at 73 Easting didn't exist. Thermal radiation passes through dust and smoke with ease. While the Iraqi commander saw a wall of brown dust, the American gunner saw a crisp, glowing white silhouette of a tank. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. The Bradley crews could see the heat signature of an Iraqi soldier's head from hundreds of meters away. They could spot the exhaust plume of a T-72 tank from 3 kilometers away. But seeing the enemy was only half the equation. You still had to kill it. And a 25mm chain gun, no matter how fast it fired, could not penetrate the frontal armor of a main battle tank. This was the second part of the American solution, the part the Soviets had dismissed as a gimmick. Attached to the side of the Bradley's turret was a rectangular box that looked like a piece of luggage. It was the Tau launcher, tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided missile. The Soviets knew about anti-tank missiles, but they viewed them as defensive weapons for infantry. They didn't understand how the Americans had integrated them. The Bradley wasn't just a bus, it was a sniper platform. The Tau missile carried a warhead capable of burning through 30 inches of steel, and because of the thermal sight, the Bradley gunner could guide this missile through zero visibility. He simply had to keep his crosshairs on the glowing heat signature of the enemy tank. The computer did the rest, sending steering corrections down 2 thin wires trailing behind the missile. This was the ingenuity gap. The Soviets built tanks to fight other tanks in a slugfest. The Americans built a system that bypassed the slugfest entirely. The M2 Bradley was designed around a philosophy that was alien to the Soviet mind. Information is ammunition. If you can see the enemy when he cannot see you, his armor thickness is irrelevant. His gun caliber is irrelevant. He is already dead. The mystery destroying the Iraqi army wasn't magic. It was the ruthless application of silicon over steel. The Americans had brought a computer into a knife fight, and as the battle raged on, the bus began to rack up a kill count that would eclipse even the mighty Abrams tank. The dust eventually settled over the Iraqi desert. The oil fires were extinguished, the prisoners were processed, and the wreckage was hauled away. But in Moscow, the real reckoning was just beginning. For months, the Soviet General Staff had been waiting for the detailed after-action reports. They needed to categorize the losses. They expected the statistics to show a heavy toll inflicted by the M1 Abrams tank and the A-10 Warthog aircraft. They prepared themselves to analyze tank-on-tank engagements to see where the T-72 tank had failed against its heavy American counterpart. Then, the final numbers crossed the desk of the Minister of Defense. The room went silent. The data was undeniable, corroborated by multiple sources and confirmed by the Americans' own published records. The M2 Bradley, the bus, the rolling coffin, the joke of the infantry had destroyed more Iraqi armored vehicles than the M1 Abrams main battle tank. This was not a statistical anomaly. It was a military absurdity. In the eyes of the Soviet generals, it was as if a fleet of delivery trucks had sunk a battleship squadron. It defied every convention of warfare they had been taught since the Battle of Kursk in the 1940s. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. The Americans hadn't just built a better tank. They had rendered the entire concept of the tank duel obsolete. The shock moment came when the analysts overlaid the engagement ranges on a map. They found that in many sectors, the Iraqi T-72 tanks had been destroyed before they even knew the battle had started. The T-72 tank had a theoretical maximum effective range of roughly 2,000 meters. But in combat conditions, especially at night or in smoke, that dropped to under 1,000 meters. The M2 Bradley's TOW missile had a range of 3,750 meters. The math was terrifyingly simple. The Bradley could sit nearly 4 kilometers away, completely invisible to Soviet optics, and guide a wire-guided missile into the turret of a Soviet tank. The missile took nearly 20 seconds to fly that distance. 20 seconds where the Soviet crew was alive, breathing, and scanning for threats, completely unaware that they were already dead. The armor gap didn't matter. The gun caliber didn't matter. The Soviet tanks were dying before they could even load their guns. The humiliation deepened when the KGB Technical Directorate admitted the state of their own technology. They tried to replicate the American thermal sights. They failed. The Soviet electronics industry, lagging decades behind the West, simply could not produce the sensitive cadmium-mercury telluride arrays needed for high-resolution thermal imaging. They could build the heavy steel hulls, but they could not build the glass eyes. Desperation set in. The Soviet response was not innovation. It was a frantic attempt to slap band-aids on a mortal wound. Knowing they could not match the American vision, they tried to blind it. This led to the rushed development of soft-kill active protection systems like the Stora one. If you look at later models of Soviet and Russian tanks, you will see 2 glowing red eyes on the front of the turret. To the uninitiated, they look like infrared searchlights. They are actually electro-optical jammers. Their sole purpose was to detect the laser guidance or the wire tracking flares of incoming missiles like the Tau and confuse the American tracking computer. It was an admission of defeat. The Stora system was a confession that said, "We cannot see you, we cannot shoot you at this range, so please, do not hit us." But even these countermeasures were futile against the Bradley's evolution. The Americans were already moving to fire-and-forget missiles and advanced top-attack munitions. The Soviet generals watched as their massive investment in 50,000 tanks, the iron fist that was supposed to smash through the Fulda Gap, was turned into a field of scrap metal by a vehicle that was essentially a glorified taxi with a telescope. The laughter had stopped. The bus had driven straight through the heart of Soviet military doctrine, and it left nothing but wreckage in its wake. The Cold War was ending, not with a nuclear bang, but with the silent green glow of a thermal monitor watching a T-72 tank burn in the dark. The final tally was not just a statistic, it was a eulogy for a superpower. When the smoke finally cleared over the highway of death and the buried bunkers of the Saddam line, the numbers were compiled into a report that sits in military archives to this day. The M2 Bradley, the aluminum box that critics said would burn at the first sign of trouble, had destroyed more armored targets than the M1 Abrams tank. The disparity was grotesque. In the Battle of 73 Easting alone, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, spearheaded by Bradleys, destroyed nearly 50 Iraqi tanks and dozens of personnel carriers in minutes. The American loss rate to enemy fire was statistically 0. For the Soviet Union, which was dissolving in real time as these reports were being written in late 1991, this was the final nail in the ideological coffin. The lesson of the Bradley was not that the Americans had built a better vehicle. It was that the metrics of power had fundamentally changed. For 50 years, the Cold War had been a contest of heavy industry. It was measured in tons of steel, millions of barrels of oil, and thousands of warheads. The Soviets were masters of this game. They could cast the biggest turrets and forge the strongest hulls. But the Bradley proved that the age of heavy industry was dead. The age of information warfare had arrived. The defeat of the T-72 tank by the Bradley was the defeat of the Soviet economy itself. The reason the Soviets couldn't replicate the thermal sights wasn't a lack of will, it was a lack of infrastructure. To build an AN divided by VS2 thermal sight, you didn't need a steel mill, you needed a sterile laboratory, advanced photolithography, and a computer industry capable of adhering to Moore's law. The Soviet Union had spent decades perfecting the hammer, only to find themselves in a war that required a scalpel. They had built a military machine designed to fight the Battle of Kursk over and over again, swarming the plains of Europe with cheap, rugged armor. The Bradley showed that a single computer chip guiding a 20-pound missile could stop that swarm dead in its tracks. The psychological impact on the Russian military establishment lingers to this day. If you look at modern Russian military doctrine, you see the ghosts of 1991 everywhere. Their obsession with asymmetric warfare, their desperate modernization of electronic warfare suites, and their reliance on tactical nuclear weapons to offset conventional weakness. All of it stems from the trauma of watching their invincible armor get dismantled by a troop transport. The M2 Bradley was never a perfect vehicle. It remained controversial, expensive to maintain, and vulnerable to IEDs in later conflicts like the occupation of Iraq. But in the context of the Cold War, it was the ultimate vindication of Western technological philosophy. It proved that the bus was not a compromise. It was a chariot of the future. As the sun sets on the era of the Cold War, the image that remains is not the mushroom cloud or the marching columns of Red Square. It is that lonely stretch of desert in 1991. Imagine the silence after the shooting stopped. The wind is still howling. Burning T-72 tanks are scattered across the horizon like bonfires, their turrets buried in the sand. And rolling past them, quiet and lethal, is the M2 Bradley. The commanders inside are not looking out the windows. They are looking at green screens, scanning the electromagnetic spectrum, seeing a world the enemy never even knew existed. The Soviet generals had laughed at the bus. But as history proves time and time again, he who laughs last usually laughs because he is the only one left alive.
And that was the Cold War. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.